Everyone else is a Vic. Take your pick, scale a few niggas, find just the right one and stick. Son, I got him. He just bought a 4G necklace.
Hello, hello, hello. How are we feeling today? Welcome back to the seventh installment, 7 out of 8. We're almost done, but not yet. These NFL draft grades, we're moving on to the AFC West. Let's get right into it. Not going to hold y'all up today. Got the Broncos up first. Now, keep in mind, let me preface this by saying very few draft picks and also did not have a first or second round pick. So their grades will be a little interesting. Let's get right into it. Starting off, we had Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma. Actually, I guess this was a second round pick, 63, right at the end of the second round. Okay, I didn't even know that. So here's my problem with it. First off, I'm not sure that wide receiver would have been where I would have gone, okay, for the Broncos. But if it was, Marvin Mims would not have been the guy, okay? And you can't even really make the argument that he's an ex-receiver, he's a boundary receiver because he's only 5'11. He's not a big receiver whatsoever. I think he's like 5'11", 180 pounds. So if we're just going for a speedy guy who can take the top off a defense, I'm going Jalin Hyatt, Josh Downs. Certainly Jalin Hyatt over Marvin Mims any day of the week. So not only do we have the Broncos taking a player who I don't think they need, they're taking a guy who was not the best for what, they're looking for. So that's two reasons for me to knock them. However, I also see the argument that they're most likely going to release KJ Hamler as a result of this pick. And, their wide receiver room is wildly injured and inconsistent. Courtland Sutton had a big down year. Tim Patrick coming off a torn ACL. Could Marvin Mims be, their wide receiver 3 next year? Sure, he could. Is that worth your first pick on the board? I'm not sure. So I gave it a B minus because I don't think it's a bad player. I actually think he'll, be used very well in a Sean Payton system. It's just that, like I said, not the best player available at the wide receiver position, and I'm not really sure I would have taken receiver. So that's why I gave that a B minus. This next one though, Drew Sanders. I love this pick. I gave it their best pick and their steal of the class because, in my opinion, Drew Sanders was the number 2 linebacker in the whole class, and for him to fall to the third round, that's a shocker to me. I think he dominated college football. I think that's fair to say. And whether it's getting after the quarterback, stuffing the run, or just flying over the field and making tackles, I think he can do it all. And to get him at 67, it's just amazing value. Amazing. I don't think anybody would have told you Drew Sanders falls at the first 2 rounds. And so for the Broncos to land him, and it will just, I don't want to say one guy will completely turn around their pass rush, but I feel like Drew Sanders can have that type of an impact. So Broncos fans should love this pick at 67. Next up, we got Riley Moss at 83, the white cornerback from Iowa. That's, that's a game changer right there. Disregarding all the memes about him being a white cornerback. I gave it a B minus, and I had to give this their worst pick, but keep in mind, it's still a B minus. It's a good pick, but they only had 5 picks, and I didn't hate any of them, so I had to give one the worst pick. And quite frankly, would I ever in a million years draft Riley Moss over Kelee Ringo? No, I wouldn't. Would I draft Riley Moss over Jacorian Bennett or, who were some of these other guys that went later rounds? Guy that went to the Falcons. Utah cornerback, went to Clark Phillips. Would I have drafted Riley Moss over Clark Phillips, Jacorian Bennett, Kelee Ringo? No. Do I think Riley Moss is a scrub? Absolutely not. I think he's going to be a solid player for the Broncos. But again, not being the best available in my opinion, it has to get a B minus. Similar to the Marvin Mims pick. However, I could be entirely proven wrong here. And if Riley Moss and Marvin Mims ball out, then I will accept the fact that I was wrong on these grades. But as they stand, they're both B minuses. Next up, J.L. Skinner in the 6th round. This is amazing value. I gave this a B. Only problem is that they re-signed Kareem Jackson after the draft, so J.L. Skinner is like 4th on the depth chart of overall safety, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not a great, spot to be in. But I like the player. I don't think he's going to play a huge impact right away. but down the line, this could be a very, very good pick. So I gave it a B for now, just because, the talent of the player and where they got him. But, you know, this could be a lot better than a B in the future. And then Alex Forsyth out of Oregon. He's not an amazing player or anything like that. No disrespect, but he was a guy who had an undrafted grade on him. The only reason I gave this a B minus for a seventh round pick is because the Broncos center position is not very strong, and Alex Forsyth may be able to come in there and provide some much needed depth and competition. So I gave that a B minus. And this is how it shaped up. Only 5 picks, but hey, their worst pick was a B minus in my opinion, so that's pretty good right there. It grades out to a 5.5, which equates to a B, and that's what I'd give it. For only having 5 picks, I think they made a solid acquisition of talent. Only a handful will benefit them next season, but in the future we could see a lot of these guys having big roles. Next up, we got the Chargers. Let's get right into it. Okay, so 21, I had to give this an A plus. If you followed the channel, you know that Quentin Johnson is my wide receiver one for the whole class. And even though I am a biased Seahawks fan, I am not going to switch up and all of a sudden start calling Jackson Smith-Njigba the best receiver. I think Quentin Johnson was easily the best receiver available at 21, miles better than Zay Flowers and better than Jordan Addison. Quentin Johnson is an X receiver. He has the size and the speed to be Julio Jones. That's extremely lofty comparisons. But let's understand now, this man could possibly play his entire career with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. Is there a better situation you can get thrown into? I'm not sure. I think this guy will be heavily in the offensive rookie of the year running, and I would pick Quentin Johnston to have the best career out of any receiver in this entire class, just based off where he's going. I gave this an A plus. I think wide receiver was a big need. I could not think of anything else that they could have done better than Quentin Johnston. So that's why, it warrants an A plus. I think it was their best pick of the whole draft. Next up, we got Tuli. I'm not gonna disrespect him by trying to say his second name. We got Tuli out of USC. This pick is the eventual Khalil Mack replacement. So I can't give it a very high grade because situation is very important. Your context is very important. I think the Chargers are a team that are trying to win a Super Bowl next season. So I think drafting a future starter does not really benefit them that much next season. But I also have to weigh the benefits of having a guy like this to learn behind Khalil Mack for a season and then eventually take over. So with both those things being weighed out, I gave it a B. Obviously not going to play a huge impact next season, but in the future could potentially be a game worker. So I have to weigh both those options. Then we have Daiyan Henley out of Washington State. I gave this an A. I also gave this their steal of the draft. The best, according to a lot of people, the best cover linebacker in the entire class. I think 85 was amazing value for him, obviously, with it being their steal of the class. And I think them losing Drew Tranquill and also not picking up Kenneth Murray's fifth-year option, linebacker is a huge need. So to get one of the better linebackers in the whole class, I think, Daiyan Henley, Trenton Simpson, Drew Sanders, Jack Campbell, those are the top 4 linebackers in this class, in my opinion. And to land one of those guys up with the 85th pick, I love it. Has to get an A from you. Next up, we got Darius Davis. And at first, I thought, oh, another TCU receiver, that's cool. Then I really thought about it, and I didn't love the pick as much, Their wide receiver room is pretty deep, to be honest, especially if they don't cut Keenan Allen. You got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer. I think they brought back Jalen Guyton as well. So I don't really see a path for Darius Davis to be an impact player right away at all. I mean, maybe if he's lucky, he's wide receiver 5, if he can beat out Jalen Guyton. But if he can't, then he's just a special teams guy. Which, that being said, he's a very, very good special teams player, maybe one of the best in the whole class. But is that worth number 125? I'm not sure. Maybe this is a long-term play on him just being a great deep threat for Justin Herbert in the future. But for right now, I gave it a B, but I do understand the possibility of him developing into a very good deep threat in the future. Next up, we got Jordan McFadden out of Clemson. He has some tape now. He has some tape against some very good college football players. Trayvon Walker, for example, did not move Jordan McFadden an inch in the clips I saw. So I gave this a B plus just because you can't fault the Chargers for wanting to beef up the offensive line, and you get good value here on a guy with a lot of college experience. So I gave it a B plus just based off the principle of trying to protect your franchise quarterback with a good player. Not much to think about there. Next up, we have Scott Matlock out of Boise State. Defensive tackle was a need for them. Scott Matlock, let's not pretend like he's a world beater or anything like that. But addressing a need with a player that's not a reach, you get a B. I am pretty lenient with these grades. You have to do something pretty egregious to get a bad grade from me. And I don't think the Scott Matlock pick was egregious whatsoever, so I gave it a B. Max Duggan. Now, you may be very shocked by this. If you've been keeping up with these draft grade videos, you should know how I feel about drafting backup quarterbacks. However, this is very, very different. Let me tell you why. Not only is this such a late pick, they could have drafted anybody at 239, and I probably would have just not graded it. But Max Duggan, think about this now. Worst case scenario, we got a practice squad guy, but think about how much better he's going to make Quentin Johnston and Darius Davis in practice. Think about how much confidence he's going to give those guys. So this is a play, in my opinion, to help develop the two receivers you drafted more than anything. Max Duggan could be completely useless. He could never play a snap in the NFL, but he will still be valuable to the Chargers by developing their two wide receivers they picked here in this class. And I have to commend them on that because that's one of the most valuable things you could have done with number 239, in my opinion. It still gets a B minus because Max Duggan himself will not play and do anything for the Chargers, but his impact on the two receivers could be very, very beneficial. So I gave that a B minus. It's still their worst pick because all their other picks were pretty solid in comparison. But I really like this Max Duggan pick at 239. Here's how it shapes up. Two wide receivers, obviously, three picks in the offensive and defensive lines, and then they got Diane Henley in the third round. It shapes up to be a 6.07, which is a B plus. I got no problem with that grade. I think a very, very strong class with multiple players who with time could develop, even better than what I graded them now. So very good class by the Chargers. Next up, we got the Chiefs, and I actually feel pretty strongly about this. I feel like I've seen the Chiefs get a lot of credit for this class. And I'm not saying it was a bad class, but I may be in the minority here. Let's get into it. Oh, shit. First up, we got Felix Anudike-Uzomah. I've heard a lot of talk about this guy. I have no problem with this pick. It would have, it kind of sucks because so many guys went off the board right before this. Brian Brzee, Myles Murphy, Nolan Smith. All three of those guys would have been better options, but obviously they all went in quick succession right before the Chiefs. But you had you could have gone two ways, right? You could have gone wide receiver at 31 by going, Jalen Hyatt, Josh Downs. They didn't obviously have a high grade on either of those guys, so they went with the best pass rusher available in their opinion. And I'm not knocking that. Could they also have gone, offensive line? Sure. But I think they had their choice and they got their guy. I think it was their best pick of the whole class. Would I have gone a different direction? Yeah, sure. I probably would have taken Jalen Hyatt at 31, just because I'm that high on Jalen Hyatt, especially going to the Chiefs. But I can't fault the Felix pick at all. So I gave it a B plus. Next up, we got Rashee Rice, and I feel very strongly about this, man. Let me start off by saying this. I think any receiver that would have been drafted here will play well. I think Rashee Rice will pan out and he'll be a good receiver for the Chiefs. Well, do I think he will be as good as a Josh Downs or a Jalen Hyatt would have been? Not at all. I think Jalen Hyatt at this spot would have got an A plus from me. Josh Downs at this spot would have got an A from me. I just don't think Rashee Rice is the guy. He was amazing in college. Amazing. But he was not impressive at the combine whatsoever. I don't even think, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he had a very bad Senior Bowl going against some of those, top of the line corners. So it's just both of those factors for me. I don't think Rashee Rice is that guy. And also, I think it was a bit of a reach. I saw Rashee Rice as a fourth or a fifth round prospect. Take him at 55. There's just too many things holding this pick back for me. I think it's their worst pick. But keep in mind, I think any receiver here will pan out. So I do think Rashee Rice will be a productive player for them, but not nearly as productive as some of these other receivers, man. It hurt. It hurt when they didn't take Jalen Hyatt, man. I wanted to see that so bad. Number 92, we got Wanya Morris out of Oklahoma. Obviously, after losing Orlando Brown, they had to go tackle eventually. And I think they got a good guy. I'm not saying Wanya Morris is going to come in right away and maybe start, and tear the league apart, but you got yourself a good prospect at 92. It's not bad value. Didn't reach on him. If this is their guy and they could have taken a tackle wherever, they chose to get Wanya Morris at 92, I'm gonna believe them. I'm gonna give him a B plus. And this whole you'll see how I feel. Chamari Connor out of Virginia Tech. I think it was a reach. This guy did not have that high of a grade by the NFL Network. I have to agree. Cornerback, yes, it is. I mean, I'm not going to say it's a need. It wasn't a need in the Super Bowl. I don't feel like. It's just I don't love the pick. I gave it a B minus. It also this is based off the fan reactions. The fan reactions in these middle rounds were very, very split down the middle. So I had a hard time, pulling from either side on these picks. But the consensus, in my opinion, was that they were not happy with these next several picks. Next up, we got B.J. Thompson. He he went to Stephen F. Austin State. Um, what do I say? What do I say about this pick? The fans weren't happy. It's just a complete shot in the dark on the guy. It's a big reach. At 166, it's just I'm not trying to doubt them or saying that these guys are just going to be completely useless or anything like that. I just don't see the same direction that the Chiefs saw with these picks right here. So I gave it a C. It's a big reach on a guy who, he went to Stephen Austin State, okay? Next up, we got Keandre Coburn, though. I think defensive tackle was a need. And at 194, this was their steal. Not saying it was a massive steal by any means, it's only a B grade, but still, this is their first guy who they took who I thought could have gone a little earlier. I think every pick before this was a reach. So shout out to them. Shout out to Keandre Coburn. I gave that one a B. And Nick Jones, I don't think he's going to make the roster. I didn't grade that one. So here is how it shakes up. Just a lot of picks, man. I didn't love. I don't think I loved the single pick. There were a couple of picks I understood, but it shaped up to be a 5.08, which is a B minus, y'all. And I can't disagree with that. This was one of the weaker classes I've seen out of any team. So that was surprising. I didn't pay much attention to it on draft night, and looking at it under a microscope, there were a lot of flaws with this class. Lastly, we got the Oakland Raiders, and let's just say this was very different from a lot of previous Raiders draft classes in that it was good. Let's get right into it. First up, you got Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech, man. This was the guy. It was Jalen Carter, Christian Gonzalez, or Tyree Wilson. They had their choice, and they chose Tyree Wilson. I'm not going to fault that because I love Tyree Wilson as a prospect. I think he has all the physical tools, especially now getting to sit alongside Mason Crosby and Chandler Jones and learn from them. I think he will put the tools together and ultimately be worthy of the number 7 pick. Me personally, I'm probably taking Jalen Carter. That's the only reason this is an A and not an A plus, but I cannot fault the Tyree Wilson pick. He's that good of a prospect. Michael Mayer at 35. Easily their best pick. It gets an A plus. I would not have done anything differently. When losing Darren Waller, what do you do? Damn, somebody just wrecked outside. Don't worry about that. When losing Darren Waller, what do? You replace him with, in my opinion, still the best tight end prospect in the whole class. Even though Dalton Kincaid is a better pass catcher, Michael Mayer is well rounded. You cannot fault that. I gave it an A plus, one of their best picks in franchise history, and I'm not afraid to call it that already. Byron Young at 70. I do like the fact they addressed D tackle. Could they also have gone other directions? Sure. Is secondary a massive need at this point? Absolutely. But they are instead deciding to completely rework the defensive line. And I like that direction. I disagree with the pick at 70, but I cannot fault the direction and the fact they got a very solid player in Byron Young. So I gave that a B minus. Trey Tucker, though. I don't love it. I don't love it. Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow. and Jacoby Myers. Trey Tucker is not going to play a big impact. Point blank. Could he be a special teams guy? Sure. Do you draft special teams guys with number 100 when Keely Ringo was on the board? Absolutely not, man. This is a C minus. It could have been even lower. I was being a little generous here. So that was their worst pick, man. Taking taking a wide receiver, not even I'm kind of reaching on a wide receiver. I don't even think he was projected to go this high when there were great DBs still left on the board. Jacorian Bennett, Keely Ringo. Ah, man, I don't like the pick, man. I really don't like the pick. But they got Jacorian Bennett, so maybe I was hating a little bit, but still, this is one of their better picks. I won't call it their best pick because they drafted Mayer, but Jacorian Bennett at 104, it's good value. I mean, he lit up the combine 40 time at least, but 104, this was a steal, man. I saw him going a lot of, third round hype, and I think 104 actually might have been one of those, compensatory picks at the end of the third round, but I'm talking, a lot higher than 104 is where I saw him going. So, not saying he's going to be a, CB1 for them, but it's good value on a position of need, so that gets a B plus for me. Next up, Aiden O'Connell. I'm not going to reiterate myself on these, backup quarterbacks. I think they're wasted picks, but still, man. Only difference is they got Jimmy G as their quarterback, so there actually is a bit of a path for Aiden O'Connell to earn a starting, well, I won't say a starting spot, just earn some playing time. But still, man, they got Brian Hoyer and I got the other guy who played some last season. What's his name? Y'all know who I'm talking about, the old Patriots quarterback. He went to Auburn, but he's there as well. So they already had two backup quarterbacks. They didn't need Aiden O'Connell. Only reason this gets a D plus and not an F or a D minus is because he actually does have a bit of a path to earning that starting job. So, but I still really, really dislike the pick. Christopher Smith, though, this was their steal of the class in my opinion. I'm not sure how he fell to 170. He was not, he didn't have the most impressive combine in the world, but I think he's a leader on a great Georgia secondary. I think that will transfer to the NFL, and it's just a great value at 170. This is now two late round picks in their secondary, which I do think will play big impact. So you got to give them credit there, both B pluses. Amari Burney out of Florida, I think linebacker was a big need throughout. They waited a little long to address it, in my opinion. I would have addressed it at 135 or even 100, but Amari Burney, he did not have, a high grade on him or anything. He was projected to be a free agent, but I do like the fact that they tried to address linebacker. So I gave that a C plus. And then addressing, doubling down on defensive tackle. Usually I would have given these picks, a not available. But Nesta Jade Silvera, he actually was projected to get drafted. So, I mean, I got to give credit where credit is due. Finding a guy in the 7th round who actually may make the roster. I gave that a B minus. Here's how their draft shook up. A lot of players, 3 on the defensive line, 2 in the secondary, linebacker, couple pass catchers, and then obviously Aiden O'Connell. That's how it shakes up to a 5.33. I could have rounded up to a B, and I did decide to do that because their first 2 picks were that good, and also by getting Jacorian Bennett and Chris Smith. Overall, it was a good draft. A couple picks I disagree with heavily. Those 2 picks, the Trey Tucker and Aiden O'Connell, could have made this a great draft. But overall, they got enough to, I think, really possibly make a difference in the Raiders' future moving forward. So this is how it shakes up overall. I think the Chargers was one of the better drafts we've seen so far. The Broncos doing very, very well with only having 5 picks. The Raiders, obviously, we just talked about them. And then the Chiefs, man, I'm not high on their draft whatsoever. A lot of things that I would have done differently. But that's going to be it for this video, y'all. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. And thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out the niggas don't know how to act.